the ship and be put in another service setting. But you know what happened to those two assailants, both of whom admitted that they had raped her? Both of whom admitted they had raped her. May I have an additional minute?
I'm pleased to yield you an additional minute.
Gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
One of them had 6 months loss of reduction in pay. One of them got demoted. One of them did not. But neither of them served any time for having admitted that they had raped her. They got what was called non-judicial punishment. What a joke that in this country we would give a unit commander the authority to be judge and jury and then not even have these individuals who commit these violent crimes have to pay anything. It doesn't go on a record. There's no sexual assault database. That's the way we've been running the military, and that must stop. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Continue to reserve.
Continues to reserve. Gentlelady from Massachusetts.
I have no additional speakers.
Does the gentlelady yield back?
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just have to respond to the last speaker that we had. Our military. Let me go back a little further. We have this language in the bill. We have worked with Ms. Tsongas. She's done great work with Mr. Turner. We have been out of the majority for 4 years. We now have the majority. I'm not going to say that it shouldn't have been fixed before. It should have. But we have this in the bill. But to attack the military and make them like they are the worst people in the world, 19,000 is excessive. It is something that never should have happened. This will take care of it. Move us. You know, we just had talk of a revered football coach we found right in their organization of a very upstanding university that we all have thought great things about, has all kinds of problems with sexual abuse, and I refuse to have the innuendo or the charge that the military is corrupt top to bottom, which is what you just basically inferred in what you just said. And we support this. We put it in the bill. We think that it is very important to take care of this problem. Lady asked me to
Will the
yield?
gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you. I did not say that the military was corrupt. What I did say was that
Reclaiming my time, you did charge them with some very serious issues and besmirched the character of the military.
Will you yield?
Be happy to yield.
What I would say to the gentleman from California is this, that the Congress of the United States has for more than a quarter or almost a quarter of a century now been looking at this issue. We have not done a good job.
Reclaiming my time as the new chairman of the committee, the first bill that we have brought forward, we have it in the bill. We are moving to take care of it.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, I think we've probably said enough. What I would say at this time is we do support this. The bill was overwhelmingly supported out of committee, 60-1, 322 to 96 in the House. We're moving strongly on this issue. We will support it through the conference and do our best to see that it remains in the bill because it is such a very important issue. With that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time, and without objection, the previous.
Madam Speaker,
For what purpose does the gentlelady from
I
Massachusetts?
did not mean to yield back my time. May I reserve a few moments to continue
Is the
to...
gentlelady asking unanimous consent to reclaim additional time? Is there any objection to the unanimous consent request?
Reserve our time.
Any objection to the unanimous consent request?
I reserve a point of order, the right to object.
The gentleman reserves the right to object, and the gentleman is now recognized on his reservation.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I understand that I did that once myself. Yield back to my time inadvertently. And with that, I would be happy to see that she has the balance of her time to close.
The reservation is withdrawn, and without objection, the gentlelady from Massachusetts is recognized.
I thank the chairman. It has been my honor and pleasure to work on a bipartisan fashion on this legislation that seeks to address the great challenge of military sexual trauma. I think that we have incorporated into the House version of the bill some very significant reforms that will help to protect victims, unfortunate victims of this great affront to young people serving in our military. Will seek to better protect them as they seek to bring to justice the perpetrators, will better train those who are put in a place and designed and created. These are positions created to help victims deal with this tremendous trauma, seek out appropriate legal remedies and do it in a way that does not further victimize the victim. Does that mean there is not always going to be additional work to do? Absolutely always. That is, otherwise we'd all be out of a job if we didn't have to simply come back and revisit and revisit and revisit these issues. But I want to make it very clear that this has been a great bipartisan effort. I'm very thankful for the support we have received. The military has made tremendous efforts, but obviously we would not be here today discussing this if there were still not a long way to go. And I appreciate the fact that this has been recognized on both sides of the aisle, and I thank you for allowing me to reclaim my time. And now I will yield time to Congresswoman Spear.
How much time?
I will yield a moment to Congresswoman Spear.
One minute. Does the gentlelady from Massachusetts say 1 minute for the gentlelady?
Thank you to the gentlelady.
Recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks you to the gentlelady from Massachusetts for yielding me 1 minute. I would just like to say to the gentleman from California and to my colleagues on the Armed Services Committee, I am very grateful that this language is in the resolution to instruct the conferees. My only point is that until we create an independent office to handle these cases, we continue to place the unit commanders and the base commanders in a conflict of interest. What happens when the unit commander is in fact the assailant? That means that the rape victim has to go to her rapist and seek to have help and to report that rape to her unit commander. What we need to do is create an independent authority that will have the expertise, which a unit commander is not going to have, about sexual assault and rape, and have the investigators that have, again, the expertise to look at these cases so that the unit commanders and the base commanders are not flummoxed by the various issues surrounding this very, very serious issue. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from California. Gentlelady from Massachusetts. Excuse me.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Massachusetts yields back the balance of her time, and all time has expired. Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion to instruct, and all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to, and the gentleman from Washington.
On that, I ask for a recorded vote.
The gentleman asks for the ayes and nays. Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion to instruct will be followed by 5-minute votes on the motion to permit closed conference meetings on H.R. 1540 and the motion to instruct on H.R. 2550. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Three votes on the House floor. This first one is 15 minutes. This is a Democratic motion to instruct conferees. This deals with the Defense Authorization Bill for 2012. It is offered by Representative Smith of Washington and Ms. Songus of Massachusetts, instructing conferees, insisting on amendments relating to improved sexual assault prevention and response in the U.S. Armed Forces. Again, this is the first of 3 votes. This one's 15 minutes, and the following 2 votes will be 5-minute votes. And these votes part of the wheels getting in motion for fiscal year 2012 spending to be wrapped up. We caught up with a Capitol Hill reporter to find out where things stand. Carrie Young joins us. She writes for Congressional Quarterly. The House begins the formal process of putting together a 9-bill omnibus spending package today. How's the work going behind the scenes?
You know, it sounds like a lot of progress is made. They've probably smoothed out by this point a lot of the easier issues. They've settled a lot of the spending matters, but there are some real sticking points still on different policy provisions.
Can you focus in on a couple of the key ones that they have to work out?
It sounds at this point like really the sticking point may be just some of the health care funding, some of the initiatives, the money for things that are related to the 2010 health overhaul. That's something Republicans really don't like, and that's something that Democrats are adamant about keeping. So it's a tough one to resolve.
When do you think the House and Senate Appropriations Committees are going to convene a conference committee to work things out?
It could be as early as Thursday. It could be as early as tomorrow. And this is more sort of a formal meeting that you say, that just to kind of move things along. And then we'd see the actual text if they get an agreement early next week.
So that formal meeting, that by the time they get to that point, they will have worked a lot of these issues out?
Oh, yeah. And they already, I mean, it sounds like a lot of work has gone on. We've heard from a lot of the appropriators that, you know, they've resolved a lot of the issues. There just are some sticking points left.
What about some of the unrelated issues, the unfinished tax-related measure, the payroll tax measure? Is any of that going to be handled in the omnibus, or will that be in a separate measure?
You know, potentially it could, but it does sound like they're keeping the omnibus fairly clean. It's kind of going to be difficult enough to get that through on its own, so they probably will steer clear of adding other things into it.
This 2012 omnibus, this 9-bill package, how much is it? What's the cost?
You know, I didn't have the numbers in front of me on that.
When do you think the House and the Senate will be ready to look at the legislation and vote it? It's going to be the end of this week?
End of next week. Senator Reid said yesterday he does not want another continuing resolution. The current round of stopgap funding the government right now expires December 16th, so they either need to clear it by then or get another CR in place.
So when all is said and done, it sounds like the skids are being greased for a package that will get fully supported when it's voted on it by the end of next week.
You know, we'll see. I mean, that's what they would like to see happen, and it is. Just going back to your previous question, it's still over about $900 billion in discretionary. It's a hard thing to put together. Some of the Democratic appropriators, like Chaka Fattah, are putting it maybe like 65% odds that this will get done. It's not a done deal at this point.
Covering the 2012 spending discussions on Capitol Hill, Carrie Young with Congressional Quarterly. Thank you for that update.
Thanks so much.
And on the House floor, underway a series of 3 votes dealing with the Defense Authorization Bill and also the military construction, the MILCON and Veterans Affairs Bill. This first vote is on the motion to instruct, the Democratic motion to instruct, which would instruct conferees to insist on amendments relating to improved sexual assault prevention and response in the armed forces, an issue that Representative Jackie Speer of California has spoken about on the House floor a dozen times or so. 2 5-minute votes will follow this 15-minute vote. We talked to Carrie Young, and she talked a bit about the payroll tax cut. Well, earlier today, in fact, just a little bit ago, in the In the Senate, on the Senate side, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said that President Obama plans to skip a planned vacation in Hawaii if necessary to sign a payroll tax cut extension into law before the end of the year. The Senate Democratic leader spoke with reporters just after an Oval Office meeting today with the president. The latest version of the extension would be paid for with a 1.9% surtax on those making more than $1 million a year. This briefing is about 20 minutes, and we'll show you as much of it as we can as this 15-minute vote continues.
Have done their best to convince the American public that they support a tax cut for the middle class. McConnell, Boehner, Romney, Gingrich all say they favor extension of the payroll tax cut. They have a funny way of showing it. Obviously, they're having a lot of trouble getting their members to go along with them. Last week, Senate Republicans rebelled against their leadership and rejected their own payroll tax proposal. Today, news reports indicate that the House Republicans are in opposition to this tax cut, and it's thrown the Republican caucus into disarray in the House. I have a simple message for my Republican colleagues. We will make sure we pass this tax cut for the middle class before the end of this year. We're not going to leave town until it's completed. And I say to my Republican colleagues, we can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. Republicans can come to the negotiating table, we welcome them, and work with us to forge a compromise that gives the middle class the relief they need to pay their bills and put food on the table. That's the easy way. Or Republicans can continue to squander, valuable time by trying to appease the Tea Party, and sadly, that's what they've done, a lot of appeasing lately. The choice is up to the Republicans. But one thing is certain, I repeat, we're not going to leave town until we pass this tax cut for the middle class. I also want to we'll give the print media some exposure for a change. GOP is split on payroll tax cut. Objections to surtax to rich. Opposition could give Obama a 2012 issue. Obama does not need a 2012 issue. The American people do not deserve or need a tax increase. Senator Durbin?
Republicans have tried to brand themselves as the party that wants to cut your taxes. We certainly know that they are loyal to that position when it comes to the wealthiest people in America. They will go to any extreme to stop the wealthiest in America from paying one more penny in taxes. But when it comes to cutting taxes for working families, the Republicans are nowhere to be found. In this circumstance, we clearly know that if we fail to act and reenact the payroll tax cut, it means that working families all across America will see an increase in their payroll taxes. What does it mean in Illinois? The average family makes about $50,000 a year. 2% or 3% turns out to be in the neighborhood of $125 to $150 a month. I've had press conferences in Chicago with these families, many of them struggling paycheck to paycheck. $150 a month may not mean much to some folks in Congress and leaders on the other side, but to the working families across America, it means a lot. It means being able to keep up with high gasoline prices and increased utility bills in the middle of the winter. That's the reality of life for working families. The President made it clear in our meeting in the Oval Office this morning. He is committed to this payroll tax cut for working families across America, and he, as the Majority Leader just said, gave us fair warning. We're staying in Washington until we get that job done. Our holiday gift to American families is not going to be a tax increase.
Thank you, and I want to thank my colleagues. Now, yesterday, Leader McConnell tried again on the Senate floor to convince the media that Republicans actually do support a payroll tax cut. But you'd never know it looking at how they voted last week. Despite his spin, Senator McConnell couldn't get a single other member of his leadership team to vote on his own bill to extend the payroll tax cut. Either Senator McConnell is suddenly a lot less powerful than we thought, or he isn't trying very hard. Senator McConnell should talk to his chief lieutenant, Senator Kyle. Just 24 hours before Senator McConnell claimed Republicans were on board with the payroll tax cut, Senator Kyle gave an extended speech on the Senate floor saying he thought it was a bad idea. In fact, Senator Kyle said the payroll tax should only be extended if the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy are also extended. Does that say where the Republican Party is in a nutshell? They won't help the middle class unless their wealthy friends are helped? Where are their priorities? They're not in sync with America's priorities, and the President's speech yesterday made clear that we Democrats are focused like a laser on the middle class, and that is where the American people want us to be. Now, like Senator McConnell, Speaker Boehner claims Republicans in the House also want to extend the payroll tax cut. But you never know it, considering he had to put off a vote on it until next week because he has a rebellion in his caucus over the issue. This morning, the newspapers told us Speaker Boehner is fighting both the number 2 and number 3 members of his leadership team on this issue. It seems Eric Cantor and Kevin McCarthy only want to extend the payroll tax cut if they get a repatriation holiday for corporations. So let me get this straight. Republicans are willing to let taxes go up on the middle class unless they get a permanent tax cut for those making over $1 million and a big tax cut for corporations with big overseas profits. If that's not class warfare by the Republicans, I don't know what is. And on the tax issue, where Democrats, frankly, have struggled for the last 2 decades, the tides have turned. We're united, we're focused, we're enthusiastic, and they just don't know what to do. Our bill is a compromise. If the Republicans' only dispute on the payroll tax is how it's paid for, our offset is 100% bipartisan. We've taken the millionaire surtax that's supported by Senator Collins of Maine, and we have scaled it back. We've added a bipartisan consensus savings from the super committee, which Leader Murray chaired, dealing with Fannie and Freddie. And we've taken Senator McConnell's own idea to cut off millionaires from collecting unemployment and food stamps. Well, if Republicans can't support this offset, Grover Norquist has come forward with another idea for them. He suggested he would be okay if the tax cut wasn't paid for. Now, we're fine paying for it, but if Republicans keep objecting to every proposed offset, Grover Norquist has given his seal of approval to another method of preventing this tax hike on the middle class. So, when Grover Norquist and the American people are on one side and the Republican leadership is on the other, something's going on here, folks. So, let me repeat what both Leader Reid and Senator Durbin said and what the President told us emphatically at the White House. We're going to stay here as long as it takes to get this done. We'd prefer to negotiate and come up with a bipartisan agreement that includes the tax break for the middle class. But if they won't agree to that, we will stay here to Christmas and even to New Year's to get it done. There's some talk that Speaker Boehner next Wednesday will throw us some kind of proposal and go home. Don't go home, Speaker Boehner, because we're going to be here, and you'll be embarrassed before the American people if you do.
As we head into this holiday season, Republicans have a very simple choice. Do they want to extend the tax cuts that are critical for our middle-class families, or are they going to stand in the way? There are over 160 million middle-class families who are waiting and watching the Republicans for an answer. Last week, Republicans couldn't make up their mind. They said no to our bill, and they said no to their bill. This week, they've been largely silent. But the clock is ticking away, and thousands in savings for middle-class families hangs in the balance. You know, for me personally, this is tough to watch, particularly because of my assignment for the last 3 months. I've gotten a close-up look at what Republicans are willing to do to fight for tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. Their insistence that tax cuts for the rich not be paid for, that they should be made permanent, that they should come at the expense of a balanced plan to address our deficit. But when we raise the issue of tax breaks for our shrinking middle-class families, they're not only nowhere to be found, they actively oppose the idea. That, you know, this is what got us into this mess to begin with, the belief that the only Americans that deserve a tax break are the very wealthy. It's the kind of trickle-down philosophy that failed the middle class and cost us jobs. I have a constituent named Nick Hanauer, and he captured this recently in an op-ed that he wrote for Bloomberg. Nick is a businessman and a venture capitalist in Seattle. He's helped launch more than 20 companies, including Amazon.com. In other words, he is one of those job creators that Republicans like to cite so often. In his op-ed, Nick wrote that it's not tax cuts for the rich that create jobs, but that, quote, only consumers can set in motion a virtuous cycle that allows companies to survive and thrive and business owners to hire. And he says an ordinary middle-class consumer is far more of a job creator than I have ever been or ever will be. His logic is clear. He believes that giving average working families a break and putting more money into their pockets will be what helps spur growth in this country. That's what we're fighting for. Because if we want to create demand and we want to create jobs, we've got to support our middle-class families who are hurting so much this year. That's why we are going to stay here until this gets done.
Oh, Bob, I'm so sorry. This is his bill.
Mr. Leader, thank you very much, and thanks for your great leadership on this. This issue is really about two things in my judgment. Number one, it's about take-home pay. Whether or not the Congress will act by the end of this year to give Americans some peace of mind as they head into the holiday season in a new year. We know this works. There's not any dispute about that. When you cut the payroll tax, you have a positive impact on gross domestic product. And I think it's important to reiterate what our leader said here today, that we are prepared and ready to stay here as long as it takes to work through the holidays to get this done. I spoke to Vice President Biden this morning. He reiterated that as we were talking about the importance of this issue, this tax cut for the American people at this terribly difficult time. I know in our state we've got 500,000 people out of work, more than 500,000. We've got almost 15 million out of work across the country. They need to see us working together to get something done for them, and this is one of the best ways, if not the singular best way, to get something done by the end of the year. Secondly, when it comes to the impact this will have, we can emphasize the positive. Let me just talk about the negative. Mark Zandi, and I won't read you all these, Mark Zandi said, quote, we'd be in recession right now without the payroll tax. And he goes on from there. You talk to any economist, any expert who knows anything about economic growth. If we don't do this, it'll harm growth, and if we do it, it'll have a positive impact on growth. And finally, there's been some questions raised about Social Security. I will submit this letter to the record, but let me just read the operative sentence. This is from Stephen C. Gross, Chief Actuary for the Social Security Administration. He said, and I'm quoting, we estimate that the projected level of the old age and survivors insurance and disability insurance trust funds will be unaffected by enactment of this provision. So there is no impact on Social Security. Anyone who says that has not read this and is being misleading about this legislation. It's critically important that when Americans go to celebrate the holidays, that they can depend upon in the year 2012 more take-home pay, or at least the take-home pay they had last year from this tax cut.
Yes.
If the House should pass a payroll bill that may include unemployment benefits next week, what elements might make it unacceptable to Democrats in the Senate? And secondly, if the House goes home and you're still here, how does that benefit anybody beyond embarrassing Republicans?
First of all, we'll see what the Republicans send us. I'm not going to be doing some hypothetical thing if they do this or do that. Right now, they can't do anything. So that's where they are. And I don't understand why people, after the last few minutes, can't understand English. We are not going to go home until we finish this. Is it going to be embarrassing to the Republicans, humiliate them? probably, as it should be, because the American people depend $1,000. This is a lot of money for people to understand that they're going to have an extra $1,000 in a given year. And also, some of that we hear from Republicans, this is great coming from them. Well, this is going to harm Social Security. This is the last year we're going to do this. Everyone knows the Bush tax cuts are gone next year. So we're not going to do it next year. We're doing it this year to maintain the economy that's getting better.
Senator, did the President say he would delay his trip to Hawaii, or did the President
I'll paraphrase it, but I'm pretty close. He said, Michelle and the girls are going to have a great time in Hawaii. They don't need me there.
Senator, could you address how this payroll tax issue fits into the broader 2012 congressional case for Democrats?
Well, it's pretty simple how it fits into the case for Democrats, as the headline I just showed you. We have been for reducing taxes for the middle class. That's what the stimulus bill was all about. We provided tax cuts for virtually 95% of Americans in that bill. This is a continuation of what we started back then. This is a reduction of the amount of money that people will have to pay in taxes that are middle class. As Senator Murray indicated, more than 160 million Americans. May not sound like a lot of people to some, but to middle class out there, $1,000 a year is extra. Extra is very important. And we're on the side of the angels in that regard with this issue and what we've done to lower taxes for the middle class during the last 3 years.
Senator, won't it be tough, won't it be hard to allow the payroll tax holiday to lapse at the end of next year if unemployment is still over 8% as projected?
As I indicated, I don't know what projections you're using, but whatever. As I've indicated, it'll be really quite easy to do because the taxes for the richest are going to go up, period. That'll take care of any problems with people being concerned of what this does to Social Security.
Are you ruling out a payroll tax cut extension that is paid for exclusively with spending cuts?
We're ruling nothing out, okay? But as Senator Schumer outlined so clearly, I don't know what other softballs the Republicans need. There are two top Republicans for president, Romney and Gingrich have come out for these tax cuts. We have, in addition to that, their guru, Grover Norquist, said, don't even pay for it. I mean, they have these softballs floating around out there, and they can't see them.
Discretionary.
Yeah, but it's very clear. But Senator Murray, of course, and made this clear in a number of statements she's made. The President has made it vital, just very, very clear, that there will be no discretionary cuts. We solved that issue late in July, early August. There will be no discretionary cuts.
Have you given any thought to how you allow the payroll tax to go back up from 3.1 to 6.2, whether it's phased up or anything in a year? Because even in a healthy economy, that's a pretty big tax increase.
Well, but it's not doesn't nearly match the increase in taxes the rich are going to get.
Leader Reid, in the President's job proposal last September, he included provisions that would have reformed unemployment insurance program, whether it was bridge-to-work programs, work sharing, or enabling states to seek waivers from the Labor Department in order to set up these programs. In the Republican offering that is potentially coming from the House to the Senate, they're going to be talking about UI reforms. I'm wondering if this is something Democrats have talked about, the administration has talked about, and
Of course we have. Of course we have. We understand that we might need to do a little changing of the program. We're happy to do that. Anything the Republicans have, if they could just relax for a minute and catch one of these softballs floating around, I think everybody would be better off.
Senate Democratic leaders from earlier today. This is the first of 3 votes on the House floor. This is a Democratic motion to instruct conferees on the National on the Defense Authorization Bill for 2012, instructing conferees to insist on amendments relating to improved sexual assault prevention and response in the U.S. military. 2 5-minute votes will follow. The next vote's on the closing part of that conference on defense authorization. The Senate is in today. Debate underway now on the President's nominee to head the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That's Ohio Attorney General Richard Cordray. You can follow the Senate on C-SPAN 2. The President's in Washington today meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and the two will speak to reporters at 3 o'clock this afternoon, 3 o'clock Eastern. You can follow that live online on cspan.org.
On this vote, the yeas are 421 and the nays are 2, and the motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to Clause 12 of Rule 22, I move that the managers on the part of the House on H.R. 1540 be permitted to close to the public any of the conference at such times as classified national security information may be broached, providing that any sitting member of Congress shall be entitled to attend any meeting of the conference.
Pursuant to Clause 12 of Rule 22, the yeas and nays are ordered, and members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote. 5-minute vote.
This vote's on closing the conference meeting over the Defense Authorization Bill. It is a 5-minute vote, closing it for national security reasons. As you're seeing on your screen, the headline, the Associated Press report, a federal judge has sentenced Rod Blagojevich to 14 years for corruption that included trying to sell or trade an appointment to the Senate seat vacated by President Barack Obama. The AP writes it's one of the stiffest penalties for corruption in a state with a history of crooked politics. They say that Blagojevich apologized for his crimes and asked for mercy in addressing the judge earlier today. Again, 14 years for former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich.
On this vote, the yeas are 404.
Mr. Keating. Mr. Keating votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 406, and the nays are 17, with one answering present. The motion is adopted, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion to instruct on H.R. 2550, on which the yeas and nays were ordered, and the clerk will report the bill.
Motion to instruct conferees on H.R. 2055, offered by Mr. Dix of Washington.
The question is on ordering the previous questions, and members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote, a 5-minute vote.
And in this series, it's the last of 3 roll call votes. We expect the House next to move on to general debate on a bill requiring congressional approval of certain executive branch regulations. This 5-minute vote on the motion to instruct dealing with the Veterans Affairs Military Construction Bill, the Military Construction Veterans Affairs Bill. It is a motion to instruct conferees to take the Senate position on the higher level of funding for the Department of Veterans Affairs medical and prosthetic research account. And the Milcon VA bill, part of the process of getting finished with all of the remaining spending bills for fiscal year 2012. We spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter earlier to find out where things stand. Carrie Young joins us. She writes for Congressional Quarterly. The House begins the formal process of putting together a 9-bill omnibus spending package today. How's the work going behind the scenes?
It sounds like a lot of progress is made. They've probably smoothed out by this point a lot of the easier issues. They've settled a lot of the spending matters, but there are some real sticking points still on different policy provisions.
Can you focus in on a couple of the key ones that they have to work out?
It sounds at this point like really the sticking point may be just some of the health care funding, some of the initiatives, the money for things that are related to the 2010 health overhaul. That's something Republicans really don't like, and that's something that Democrats are adamant about keeping. So it's a tough one to resolve.
When do you think the House and Senate Appropriations Committees are going to convene a conference committee to work things out?
It could be as early as Thursday. It could be as early as tomorrow. And this is more sort of a formal meeting that you see, that just to kind of move things along. And then we'd see the actual text if they get an agreement early next week.
So that formal meeting, that by the time they get to that point, they will have worked a lot of these issues out?
Oh, yeah. And they already, I mean, it sounds like a lot of work has gone on. We've heard from a lot of the appropriators that, you know, they've resolved a lot of the issues. There just are some sticking points left.
What about some of the unrelated issues, the unfinished tax-related measure, the payroll tax measure? Is any of that going to be handled in the omnibus, or will that be in a separate measure?
You know, potentially it could, but it does sound like they're keeping the omnibus fairly clean. It's kind of going to be difficult enough to get that through on its own, so they probably will steer clear of adding other things into it.
This 2012 omnibus, this 9-bill package, how much is it? What's the cost?
You know, I didn't have the numbers in front of me on that.
When do you think the House and the Senate will be ready to look at the legislation and vote it? Is it going to be the end of this week?
End of next week. Senator Reid said yesterday he does not want another continuing resolution. The current round of stopgap funding the government right now expires December 16th, so they either need to clear it by then or get another CR in place.
So when all is said and done, it sounds like the skids are being greased for a package that will get fully supported when it's voted on it by the end of next week.
You know, we'll see. I mean, that's what they would like to see happen, and it is, just going back to your previous question, it's still over about $900 billion in discretionary. it's a hard thing to put together. Some of the Democratic appropriators, like Chaka Fattah, are putting it maybe like 65% odds that this will get done. It's not a done deal at this point.
Covering the 2012 spending discussions on Capitol Hill, Carrie Young with Congressional Quarterly. Thank you for that update.
Thanks so much.
On this vote, the yeas are 409 and the nays are 13. The motion is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Right here. Without objection, the chair appoints the following conferees on H.R. 2055.
Mrs. Rogers of Kentucky, Young of Florida, Lewis of California, Frelinghuysen, Adderholt, Mrs. Emerson, Ms. Granger, Mr. Simpson, Culberson, Crenshaw, Rayburg, Carter, Dix, Ms. Pulaski, Mrs. Lowy, Mr. Serrano, Ms. DeLauro, Mrs. Moran, Price of North Carolina, and Bishop of Georgia.
Without objection, the chair appoints the following conferees on H.R. 1540.
From the Committee on Armed Services for consideration of the House bill and the Senate amendment and modifications committed to the conference, Messrs. McKeon, Bartlett, Thornberry, Aiken, Forms, Miller of Florida, Lobiondo, Turner of Ohio, Klein, Rogers of Alabama, Schuster, Conaway, Whitman, Hunter, Rooney, Schilling, Griffin of Arkansas, West, Smith of Washington, Reyes, Ms. Loretta Sanchez of California, Mrs. McIntyre, Andrews, Mrs. Davis of California, Mrs. Langevin, Larson of Washington, Cooper, Ms. Bordallo, Mrs. Courtney, Loebsack, Ms. Songas, and Ms. Pingree of Maine. From the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence for consideration of matters within the jurisdiction of that committee under Clause 11 of Rule 10, Mr. Rogers of Michigan, Mrs. Myrick, and Mr. Ruppersberger. From the Committee on Education and the Workforce for consideration of Sections 548 and 572 of the House bill and Sections 572 and 573 of the Senate amendment and modifications committed to the conference. Messrs. Petri, Heck, and George Miller of California. From the Committee on Energy and Commerce for consideration of Sections 911, 1099A, 2852, and 3114 of the House bill and Section 1089 of the Senate amendment and modifications committed to the conference. Messrs. Upton, Walden, and Waxman. From the Committee on Financial Services for consideration of Section 645 of the House bill and Section 1245 of the Senate amendment and modifications committed to the conference. Mr. Backus, Mrs. Capito, and Mr. Ackerman. From the Committee on Foreign Affairs for consideration of Sections 1013, 1014, 1055, 1056, 1086, 1092, 1202, 1204, 1205, 1211, 1214, 1216, 1218, 1219, 1226, 1228 through 1230, 1237, 1301, 1303, 1532, 1533, and 3112 of the House bill, and Sections 159, 1012, 1031, 1033, 1046, 1201, 1203, 1204, 1206 through 1209, 1221 through 1225, 1228, 1230, and 1245 of Title 13, and Section 1609 of the Senate amendment and modifications committed to the conference. Ms. Ross-Leitonen, Mrs. Shabbat, and Berman. From the Committee on Homeland Security for consideration of Section 1099H of the House bill and Section 1092 of the Senate amendment and modifications committed to the conference. Mr. Daniel Lundgren of California, Mrs. Miller of Michigan, and Mr. Thompson of Mississippi. From the Committee on the Judiciary for consideration of Sections 531 of Subtitle D of Title V, 573, 843, and 2804 of the House bill, and Sections 553 and 848 of the Senate amendment and modifications committed to conference. Mr. Smith of Texas, Coble, and Conyers. From the Committee on Natural Resources for consideration of Sections 313, 601, and 1097 of the House bill and modifications committed to conference. Mrs. Hastings of Washington, Bishop of Utah, and Markey. From the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform for consideration of Sections 598, 662, 803, 813, 844, 847, 849, 937 through 939, 1081, 1091, 1101 through 1111, 1116, and 2813 of the House bill, and Sections 827, 845, 1044, 1102 through 1107, and 2812 of the Senate amendments and modifications committed to the conference. Mrs. Ross of Florida, Langford, and Cummings. From the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology for consideration of Sections 911 and 1098 of the House bill and Sections 885, 911, 912 of Division E of the Senate amendment and modifications committed to conference. Messrs. Hall, Quell, and Sam Johnson of Texas. From the Committee on Small Business for consideration of Section 804 of the House bill and Sections 885 through 887 of Division E of the Senate amendment and modifications committed to conference. Mr. Graves of Missouri, Mrs. Elmers, and Ms. Velasquez. From the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure for consideration of Sections 314, 366, 601, 1098, and 2814 of the House bill, and Sections 262, 313, 315, 1045, 1088, and 3301 of the Senate amendment and modifications committed to conference. Messrs. Micah, Kravac, and Bishop of New York. From the Committee on Veterans Affairs for consideration of Sections 551, 573, 705, 731, and 1099C of the House bill, and Sections 631 and 1093 of the Senate amendment and modifications committed to conference. Mr. Bilirakis, Ms. Burkle, and Ms. Brown of Florida. From the Committee on Ways and Means for consideration of Sections 704, 1099A, and 1225 of the House bill, and Section 848 of the Senate amendment and modifications committed to conference. Messrs. Camp, Herger, and Levin.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 10.
Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to the House Resolution 479 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 10. The Chair appoints the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 10, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to amend Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code to provide that major rules of the executive branch shall have no force or effect unless a joint resolution of approval is enacted into law.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, will each control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, the American people today have been hit by an onslaught of unnecessary federal regulations. From the Obama administration's health care mandate to the increase of burdens on small businesses, government regulation has become a barrier to economic growth and job creation. By its own admission, the administration is preparing numerous regulations that each will cost the economy $1 billion or more per year. Its 2011 regulatory agenda calls for over 200 major rules which affect the economy by $100 million or more each every year. Employers, the people who create jobs and pay taxes, are rightly concerned about these costs and the cost of regulations imposed on their businesses. In a Gallup poll conducted last month, nearly 1/4 of small business owners cited compliance with government regulations as their primary concern. That should motivate us to take action today. Rather than restrain its efforts to expand government, the administration now seeks to accomplish through regulatory agencies what it cannot get approved by Congress. The REINS Act gives the people's representatives in Congress the final say over whether Washington will impose major new regulations on the American economy. More than once this year, the President himself has talked about the dangers that excessive regulations pose to our economy. He has called for reviews of existing regulations. He has professed a commitment to more transparency. The President has stated that, quote, "It is extremely important to minimize regulatory burdens and avoid unjustified regulatory cost," end quote. Unfortunately, the President's actions speak louder than his words. But rather than make good on its statements, the Obama administration has proposed 4 times the number of major regulations than the previous administration over a similar time period. And the White House has admitted to Congress that for most new major regulations issued in 2010, the government failed to analyze both the cost and the benefits. It is time for Congress to take action to reverse these harmful policies. With the REINS Act, we can hold the administration accountable for its unjustified regulatory assault on America's job creators. And we can guarantee that Congress, not unelected agency officials, will be accountable for all new major regulatory cost. The American people want job creation, not more regulation. The REINS Act reins in out-of-control federal regulations that burden America's businesses and job creators. I thank Mr. Davis of Kentucky for introducing this legislation. I urge all my colleagues to support the REINS Act, and I'll reserve the balance of my time.